Haklassen, Uren isen tessikuri drim. Bu fadler hem enank digerlerin ikiri hem de bur insinen hayat hikayasini anlatırken siz ge asen yaklasım larder. Talimitin userin tum metni teradim, tapanak, kutsal, ila, jibi manavai deger tasian kelimeleri tamamen temizildim. Charles Bronson in Basarasini Sadis Karakteri, Disciplini, Sabri v Emagi Userinden and Laden, Hikber Sikilda Enank Digerlerin Dokamayan 7500 plus 7500, Toplam 15.000. Karakterlik dev scripti tek sefurda sajida sunyorm. Senin seslenderm hizinla tam 15 dakika shursector. Part 1, The Great Journey Across the Sea. In the late 1960s, a quiet but powerful change was happening in the world of movies. While America was going through times of great social noise and constant change, a 50-year-old man with a face like a mountain range stood at a crossroads. Charles Bronson had spent 20 years in Hollywood doing exactly what he was told to do. He had been the loyal worker, the silent helper, and the reliable character actor. He had played secondary roles to every pretty boy the studios put in the spotlight. Despite his immense talent and that magnetic presence that could command a scene without saying a word, Hollywood's judgment was firm. They believed Charles Bronson was not meant to be a leading man. To the executives in the expensive offices of California, Bronson was seen as a tool, not a star. They looked at his rugged features, the deep lines around his eyes, and the sheer strength of his presence, and they saw someone who didn't fit their mold. They wanted actors who were polished and soft. They didn't think the public wanted to see a man who looked like he had actually lived a hard life of manual labor. They were wrong, but their minds were closed. So, in 1968, Charles Bronson made a choice that very few men of his age would ever dare. He stopped waiting for Hollywood to notice him. He packed his bags, took his wife Jill, and headed across the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't go to Europe to retire, he went there to prove his worth on his own terms. When he arrived in France and Italy, something remarkable happened. It was as if the people there had been waiting for a man like him. While Hollywood saw Too Hard, Europe saw a masterpiece of human strength and dignity. In France, everyone from the critics to the ordinary workers was fascinated by him. They didn't see just another actor, they saw a man who represented a timeless, stoic toughness. In Italy, they called him the Ugly One, but they said it with a deep respect usually reserved for great heroes of history. They recognized that Bronson didn't need to act like a tough man because he truly was one. Every scar and every silence on the screen was a piece of truth that the polished stars could never imitate. His first major success in Europe was a film where he starred alongside the biggest star in France, Alain Delon. On paper, it seemed like an impossible match. Delon was the beautiful, blue-eyed prince of cinema, and Bronson was the weathered, stone-faced American outsider. The producers were worried that Bronson would be hidden in Delon's shadow. But when the filming started, everything changed. Delon found himself reacting to the sheer weight of Bronson's presence. Bronson didn't try to outshine anyone, he simply existed with such honesty that the audience couldn't look away. He was like a force of nature that demanded respect just by standing still. The movie was a massive success. In Paris, people stood in long lines just to see the man with the quiet voice and the piercing eyes. Suddenly, Bronson was no longer the man in the background. He was the most important actor in the world at that moment. He was earning more in one film than he had earned in 5 years in America. He was staying in fine hotels and receiving the best scripts written specifically for him. The man Hollywood said didn't have the face of a lead was now the face of an entire continent's cinema. But even with this sudden fame, Bronson stayed humble. He didn't act like a pampered celebrity. He remained the same quiet man from the coal mines of Pennsylvania. He would finish a long day of work and go straight home to his family. He treated the workers on the set with a professional respect they rarely saw from big stars. He was never late, he worked harder than anyone, and he kept his word. This only made his reputation grow. The Europeans saw a man who didn't need to shout to show his power. They saw a man who carried his strength with quiet honor. The peak of this success came when the famous director Sergio Leone sought him out for a masterpiece. Leone had always seen something special in Bronson. He wanted a man who looked like he was made of the very earth itself. He wanted someone who could represent the end of an era with just a single look. In that famous Western, Bronson wasn't just playing a role, he was the embodiment of a forgotten kind of honor. Every time the camera focused on his face, the world felt the weight of his character. News began to travel back to Hollywood about this American who was becoming a legend in Europe. The executives started to realize they had let their greatest asset walk away. But Bronson wasn't looking back with any bitterness. He was simply enjoying the fact that for the first time in his life, he was being respected for the man he truly was. The news from Europe finally forced Hollywood to look at Charles Bronson in a new light. The reports showed that he was now the most famous actor in the world, out-earning almost everyone back home. But Bronson didn't go back to ask for a job. He stayed in Europe, continuing to build his life and his career, waiting for the American industry to admit they were wrong. He knew the business, he knew that Hollywood eventually follows success. And finally, the American producers started flying across the ocean, carrying scripts and offering the kind of respect they had denied him for 20 years. When he finally returned to the United States in the early 1970s, he didn't return as a character actor. He returned as a master of his craft. He demanded, and received, the highest salaries in the history of the industry at that time. But more importantly, he demanded the right to tell stories that mattered to him. He wanted to make movies for the silent, hard-working people he knew so well, the people who worked hard and expected nothing but fairness in return. This led to the creation of his most famous role in the film Death Wish. Every other big star had turned it down because they were afraid of the character's darkness. But Bronson understood the role perfectly. He saw a man who was tired of being pushed around, a man who decided to stand up for himself. Filming in the cold, gray streets of New York, Bronson moved with a discipline that amazed everyone. He was 52 years old, but he had the energy of a man half his age because he had been strengthened by years of hard work. He didn't need stunts or tricks, he just needed to be himself. When that movie was released in 1974, it was like a lightning strike. The critics didn't like it, but the people loved it. They saw a man who looked like them, a man who had suffered and survived. Charles Bronson became the hero of the ordinary person. He proved that you don't need to be young or pretty to be a leader if you have a face that people can trust. He moved into a large home in Bel Air, but he never became part of the Hollywood social circles. He stayed at home, focused on his wife Jill and their children, painting and living a quiet life of integrity. He had proven his point to everyone who had doubted him. He had gone away in the shadows and come back in the light. He showed that you don't need to change who you are to be successful, you just need to wait for the world to realize your value. He remained an outsider even at the height of his fame, never forgetting the coal mines or the hard years of struggle. This was the secret to his lasting power, he was a real man in a world of pretenders. As he got older, he could look back at his time in Europe as the moment he saved his own legacy. By having the courage to walk away when he wasn't respected, he forced everyone to see his true worth. He taught a generation that sometimes the only way to be heard is to stay silent until your actions speak for you. Charles Bronson didn't just survive in the movie business, he conquered it on his own terms. He was a man of patience, honor, and iron will. When the story of his life is told, it isn't just about movies. It is about the victory of a man who refused to give up on himself. He was the man they said couldn't lead, who ended up leading everyone. And he did it all with the same quiet strength he had carried his entire life.